Welcome back to Andersen Acres. We're in the kitchen again tonight, and today we are going to be making a chocolate chip bagel. This is a lot of fun and it's quite delicious. It combines the chewiness of a bagel with the delicious nature of chocolate chips. So let's get started. We're going to use our bread maker. You can, of course, do this by hand or do this in your mixer. It doesn't actually matter. Okay, all you're doing is using your bread maker to mix the dough. It's literally no different than using your mixer or doing it by hand. Doesn't matter. So I'm going to use my bread maker to mix the dough. However you mix the dough is fine. So our first ingredient is we're going to do about 2 tablespoons of butter. You can use margarine if you like. The defining flavor here is going to be the chocolate chips. So if you use margarine instead of butter, you won't really notice. We are going to do 2 tablespoons of brown sugar, tightly packed tablespoons. When you're measuring brown sugar, you almost always are going to tightly pack it. If you're measuring it in a recipe and it tells you not to tightly pack it, then that's what you do, okay? If it doesn't say anything in your recipe, you tightly pack it. Okay, that's the rule with brown sugar. We're going to do 1 teaspoon of salt. Any salt you have on hand. That happens to be Himalayan, but if you have table salt, that's fine. Kosher salt, that's also fine. It doesn't matter. Any salt you have is fine. It doesn't matter. We're not going to worry about it. We're going to do 1 cup of water. Water works really well in this recipe. You do not need milk. Then we're going to do 3 cups of just your all-purpose flour or your bread flour, whatever you normally use for making bread. I didn't even spill. Go me. And we want 1 heaping teaspoon of yeast. Now I'm using a bread machine yeast. You can of course use a traditional yeast if you're pre-dissolving it and working by hand, that's fine. Or you can just use a quick riser bread machine yeast. It doesn't matter. Yeast is yeast. It's fine. So we also have half a cup of semi-sweet chocolate chips. So you can totally use a milk chocolate or a dark chocolate chip. I'm just using semi-sweet because that's my default. You can change the chocolate chip if you like. It'll just change the chocolate. It's not a big deal. I am not going to put these in right now. I am going to let this mix in the bread maker for about 10 minutes. Then I'll add in the chocolate chips and let the bread maker do its thing afterwards. So it's not really a big deal. You can add these at the beginning if you like, but your mixer or your bread maker might chop them up a little bit if you're not careful. Okay? So what we're going to do is add these after about 10 minutes of mixing. I'm not going to show you that step. I'm just going to tell you add those after you have mixed or kneaded your dough for about 10 minutes. Then add these in, mix them in well so that they're well distributed in your dough. Set your dough aside to rise. So I'm using the bread maker, so it'll do the rise in the bread maker. But probably you're going to want about an hour rise time after your dough is fully kneaded. Okay, so that's what we are going to do. We're going to pop this in the bread maker and we'll come back in about an hour and a half. So here's our finished dough. It has completed its first rise. You'll notice there's chocolate chips all over the place. Your chocolate chips may be slightly warm simply because the dough creates a warmth when it's rising. That's okay. Your hands might get a little chocolate on them. That's not a bad thing. So what you're going to do is you're going to form this into bagels. So take off a chunk. I don't like using bagel cutters for bagels that have chunks in them. It makes your life more difficult than it has to be. So rip off a chunk. Form a ball like you would if you were making a bun or a roll. Pinch the bottom closed. And then push your thumb through the middle. And there we go. Widen that hole. Remember, these are going to rise, so you want this hole bigger than it's supposed to be because it's going to rise. So a hole about like that. So how many bagels are you making? Well, that's going to depend on how big you want them. So I'm just doing a decent sized bagel, but not huge. Okay, so mine are going to be a good size, but not humongous. So I'm probably going to get about 10 out of this dough. How many you get depends on how big you make your bagels. Yes, you can make mini bagels with this as well. So we're just going to widen that hole again. It's really easy to do this. You're just going to keep doing this and place the bagels on a pan. Just on a cookie sheet is fine. So you just place them on a cookie sheet like so. No big deal. And you just keep doing this until you have run out of dough. So I'm not going to make you watch this whole thing, this whole process, because it's annoying. So when you have finished shaping your bagels, what you're going to do is set them aside somewhere warm for about 30 minutes so that they can puff up a little bit. You want them a little bit puffed, but not for a full hour. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to finish shaping these off camera, then I will set my sheet aside, and I usually use the microwave because it's a good spot to maintain heat and humidity. Obviously, I don't turn the microwave on, but it maintains its heat and humidity and they don't dry out that way. But you can use whatever you normally use for rising your breads. It doesn't matter. So place them wherever you like and just wait about half hour for them to puff up at least a little bit. So we'll come back once that has happened and then I'll show you what to do next. Alright, so after your bagels have risen just a little bit, not the full amount, you're going to need to boil them. That's what gives bagels their nice, chewy texture. Without boiling, they're just bread in a bagel shape. So boiling is essential. So you're going to want to boil some water, just a medium-sized pot. It doesn't need to be very much water, only enough that you can just boil your bagels. You're throwing the water out afterwards anyway. So to that water, you'll add 2 tablespoons or so of honey. The exact amount of honey is not super important. So get that honey in there. Mix that in so that it dissolves. So your water should now have a slight golden color to it. There we go. And it'll come back to a boil pretty quick. Pretty much as soon as that honey dissolves, it returns to a boil. So then we are going to take our bagels, we're going to drop them in, and you're going to let them boil for 30 seconds to a minute per side. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm just basically counting to 30 in my head, and then we're going to flip it over. So it doesn't have to be that exact. The longer you let them boil, the chewier the texture, but don't boil your bagels for more than 2 minutes total, so no more than 1 minute per side. So 30 seconds, 45 seconds, somewhere in there is kind of the sweet spot. So we're just going to let that do its thing. And yet you might have some chocolate chips escape and dissolve in your water. That's not a big deal. Remember, we're throwing the water out after anyway. So once you have done this with all of your bagels, so I have 10. So how many bagels you have, again, will be dependent on how big you made them. So I have 10 bagels. Go. Remember which side is up so that you don't put them upside down on the pan. So I have about 10 bagels, and what we're going to do after is bake them for about 20 to 25 minutes at 375 degrees Fahrenheit, and then they'll have a nice glossy look. We'll come back and actually show you the finished product, and I'm not going to make you watch me boil 10 bagels because it's annoying. But you boil each one, and yes, the water will turn darker because remember, you've got chocolate, so some of the chocolate is inevitably going to melt and discolor your water. It's not a big deal. Don't worry about it. That is completely normal. Okay, so we're just going to flip that guy over and splash water everywhere. No big deal. That's why we have claws, right? We just wipe it up. It's not a big deal. So boil all of your bagels, get them on your pan, and then you're going to bake them again, 20 to 25 minutes at 375 degrees Fahrenheit. And we're going to stop the video now, and I'll pick it up again when they have been thoroughly baked so you can see the finished product. But like I said, you do not want to watch me boil 10 bagels. It's boring. And there we have it. Chewy and delicious chocolate chip bagels. You can see the chocolate chips in all of them. They're pretty evenly distributed. That is done simply when you're kneading. Make sure the chocolate chips are everywhere if you can, and don't be afraid to add a few extra chocolate chips just for that extra taste. So I hope you enjoyed making chocolate chip bagels with us today, and I hope you'll do this at home. They're a crowd pleaser, especially for children. They absolutely adore chocolate chip bagels. We'll see you tomorrow.